Hi, today I'm here with Mary Carol Koester. She is an artist and owner of Azalea Bindery LLC based in Asheville, North Carolina. She completed a 25-year career in forestry and then began a 10-year apprenticeship in bookbinding and paper marbling. She's a member of the Southern Highland Craft Guild, the River Arts District Artists, and the Guild of Bookworkers. She binds manuscripts, memoirs, family albums, and presentation boxes. She also repairs Bibles and heirloom books. Mary Carol is inspired by textiles and couture. Influential artists include Diane von Furstenberg and William Morris. She works in silk, linen, and goatskin, as well as fine marbled papers. Her design motifs include floral, architectural, and geometric elements. Her art has evolved to a point where design and utility flow together. Welcome, Mary Carol. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Jen. Pleased to be here.
The conversation we had, I guess it was a few months ago at this point, I think you were going for a walk and we had a great conversation. And I remember that you mentioned that you feel like artists are minimally informed about business. And I love what you said about that. And I believe this term is valuable and it's an important awareness to have. Do you feel that you were minimally informed starting out?
Yes, I feel like I was not informed at all. And my regrets about my business, I did have a 10-year apprenticeship in bookbinding and the other arts I do. However, I wish I would have started in the 5th year with business education. And instead, I waited till I incorporated and then started. So I had several years that were difficult. And I come from a background where when I needed to know information, I would go find it out or find a teacher or mentor or whatever I needed. So I began to take a lot of business classes, sometimes 2 and 3 times. And I mean, for me, pardon me?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, my only regret about the progress of my business was it was slowed down because I didn't take business training early enough.
So what does that mean, slowed down?
I wasn't ready to hit the pavement when I was ready with my line, with my artwork, but I didn't have any idea how to run a business.
Got it. So the side of the craft and the art and the, actual production and everything you had, but not the side of business.
Correct.
So, so now you've gotten a lot of training, you've had mentors, you've gotten support over the last few years. How many years has that been since you've been getting that support?
8.
Okay, wow.
And I still have mentors and I still take classes. I just signed up for a class right before we started this podcast.
Nice. That's great. And how long have you been in business total?
I started training in 2000. I didn't incorporate till 2011. So, I mean, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, but I've just been in business for 8, 9.
Okay, got it. So you got help pretty quickly. You kind of saw that you wanted that and it was a need.
Yes.
Okay. What are the most important aspects of business that have helped you the most through all that training you've received?
Well, I think it gave me some structure to think about my business. And now I definitely divide my business in my own mind in terms of my artwork and running the business. And so even that distinction keeps me really clear about where I need to spend my time and where I want to hire help. Like I've hired people to do bookbinding with me, and I've also hired people to do bookkeeping with me. And I find that overall and this is just trial and error, I'm more productive in my bindery when I'm working by myself. And so I've chosen to spend more money on, whatever help I need. I'm now pretty fluent on the, business side too. but I still have a little bit of help in that area. And I do bring in binders when I need them for a large project.
Got it. So it sounds like you've been learning how you work best and where the things are that are not your genius, and you pass those on to somebody else and figure out how you work best to make it more efficient.
Right, but my goal, and I can't exactly tell you why, I think I've always come out in these Myers-Briggs tests as right in the middle of thinking, feeling, and
Mm-hmm.
left brain, right brain. So uh, I enjoy every aspect of my business, very much the business aspects, and I don't think you can really uh, run a successful business unless you know your own numbers every month when you're balancing and you're looking at what's coming in, what's going out. I don't think you can do it once a year when it's tax time and really have a progressive outgoing strategy to building a business.
Great. So that clarity and the coming to clarity every month to see where you're at. Some people would even say more often than that, depending on where your business is. But that monthly clarity so you can know where you're at and where you're going. Yeah, that's great. I used to do my bookkeeping after the year many years ago. So when you said that, I cracked up because that's the way I used to do it about more than 10 years ago. So I learned the hard way.
Well,
Okay.
I've known a bunch of artists who just put receipts in a shoebox for the whole year and then take that shoebox to their accountant and then they sign their taxes. So they really have very little information. They can look at the totals in their, but they're, a lot maybe just looking at, do I have to pay or do I have a refund? And that may be the extent to which they really get involved with income and outgoing cash flow.
So it sounds like what you're saying with the advantage of that, the idea of being clear it also helps influence your strategy and where you're at, so you know where to do next. Is that what you're saying?
Very much so, because there's so many marketing opportunities these days, and some of them work for, one might work for my business, it doesn't work for yours, and vice versa. So, uh, and that, a lot of that you have to you have to try things and see if it works, and if it doesn't work, I think I read really early on. I just bought this used book, how to write, how women should write a business plan, or could write a business plan. And one of the things that stuck with me was the whole premise was to know when to say no,
Hmm.
and that's become a much stronger, um, you know, what do you call that? Like a decision point for me. Um, Now that's the first question I ask myself if a job comes in and I'm not sure it's exactly what I do. The very first question is, should I say no? And and so then I'll talk through with the client, and in my own mind, uh, I'm looking at my skill set, I'm looking at the materials I have on hand, I'm looking at what it's going to cost me to do that, and then I evaluate whether I should just say, no, I'm not the right person for this job. And I'll help you find somebody who is.
Great. Yeah, I think there's a fine line depending on where you're at in your business with feeling like you have to take everything versus really distinguishing what you do and what you don't do, and having a referral system for those who can help people who you don't want to help or you're not, you don't, it's not your thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you're starting a business, you have to figure out what your thing is, and you're trying to make money, so you're trying to do as much as you possibly can. But I just think as a as a goal in a new business, uh, I would advise try to figure out what exactly you're doing and limit what you do till you have that whole stream of production, marketing, sales, bookkeeping in place.
Mm-hmm.
And then, add as best you can. And I know that's got always got to be really flexible, because you know, a great job comes in, you want to take it, but I think you can really have a difficult time uh, formulating a business structure that's going to work for you in the long term if you don't, as quickly as possible, figure out what you do best, what you make the most money at, and gear your business towards that. Sort of like people call it your coffee mug,
Mm-hmm.
and figure out what that is. And then as you build, I mean, especially as an artist, your creativity is endless. And as your skills mature, you know, you can do more and more. Like for me, I now have a new teacher that I'm working on the finish work, the gold tooling and things on books that, you know, I'd like to be able to offer. But that's after I have all the basics in place to be able to do pretty much what comes through the door.
Got it. I think that's really good advice. So to really hone in on what you do, and it sounds like you learn through trial and error too, to what you say yes to, what you say no to. I think that's typical. To actually learn though, to instead of like keeping on doing the thing that you don't want to do. I have that a lot with jewelry too. People come and ask me things that I so not what I do, and they don't get it, and I have to just be clear and send them to somebody else. So yeah. So and then once you're saying, I love what you said about once you get your sort of bread and butter down and your systems in place, then you can actually say yes or no on a higher level and do more of what you want to do, like the higher end stuff.
Right. And you know, at the same time, then you've learned the process of a business transaction. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you know from the beginning how much the production costs, you know, what all your costs and what you need to charge and who your client is and what the benefits are that they get from your product so that they'll buy it. And then you have a bookkeeping system in place where that sale goes in, and you're accounted for your state sales tax that you're going to have to pay quarterly. So you've got a basis of, and then you just add products onto that. But the longer you start adding products without having that stream of business structure, the more it becomes almost impossible to, I mean, if you try to walk in 4, 6, or 8 years later and put that all together, it can happen, but most likely you will have terrible records, and you're probably going to have to hire somebody to come in and actually set up your business. And that's not a good way to grow a business. And that's not a good way to, I mean, that comes across to customers. You know, when you come across with to them, these are my prices. I've done my research, you know, for my competition who does a similar thing. I don't waver. I don't feel uncomfortable. I know what my costs are. You know, I know what I need to make. This is my price. I'm proud of the work I put into this. And then you have, you know, you're giving them an invoice that is a real invoice. You have all the payment method. You have all the payment methods in place that are right at your hand, right at your fingertips. So you present yourself as, you know, I'm a functioning business just like the Ace Hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that closes a lot of sales because there's a trust
Mm-hmm.
that you know what you're doing. You're not going to screw around with my credit card. You know,
Or decide to charge you more or whatever, not deliver. Yeah. So that professionalism and putting out the professionalism on your end, having clarity, knowing what your profit margin is, knowing what your costs are, and providing value, like focusing on providing value ultimately. And that's also in your systems to make things clear and easy for your customers.
right. And like somebody might go to the River Arts District and there's paintings down there that range from 200 to 12,000. So each of those artists has to be able to explain in a you know, believable, authentic fashion that, you know, yes, my painting's 10,000 more, but here's why. And because especially with art, um, there is some there's a lot of discretion in pricing. And so people are unsure. It's not like a t-shirt. They know it's either going to be, you know, 10, 50 or 30, but it's probably not going to be, I mean, it might be 50 somewhere, but they know about what it costs. With art, it's very subjective. And so I think, especially as you do get a higher quality product, hopefully it's, you know, obvious and visual. But also, I think a lot of times there needs to be a discussion about, you know, explaining this painting might take me 2 months, or this book has solid gold. You know, it's $300 for a tiny little yard of foil. It's like, I'm not overcharging you. These are my legitimate
Yeah.
costs to
Yeah,
do
so it sounds like my big thing with sales is if somebody questions the price, I always talk about the value of the thing.
right,
Um,
right.
and
I
you know,
agree.
clarifying this kind of metal and what that is, or this kind of gemstone and what kind of quality it is, you know, or I show them more about how it's made, all those kinds of things. And I think that's something that people shy away from sometimes. And I think that conversation, being prepared for that conversation and understanding the value is huge, you know, to be able to show up professionally and to be a stand for your work, and not in a defensive way, but just a really clear, it's educational marketing as well. It's like helping people understand the value of the thing that they're looking at and the uniqueness.
Right, right. And I think that helps them make an educated decision, as you were just saying. So they're less likely to have buyer's remorse. They're less likely to feel insecure about their purchase. And, you know, I just think that you end up building sometimes lifelong relationships.
Absolutely.
And they feel very comfortable referring you because, you know, they had a good experience and they felt like they could trust you.
Absolutely. And that's huge.
Yeah,
What?
because a lot of us are just individuals, like they come to my home. I mean, you know, I could,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
absolutely.
we don't have the backing of, say, Ace Hardware.
All right. So one thing we talked about before as well, you mentioned about, and this kind of comes off of that conversation, just distinguishing how people who are buying art and crafts are typically, you know, it's a disposable income for them. It's not something they need. It's not the electric bill. How did the learning about that influence how you perceive your work?
Uh, One of the main things, one of the things I got of most value to me out of becoming a member of the craft guild was there was a very high standard of excellence. And so I adopted that. And even one of my early teachers, one of my marbling teachers who was a member of the guild, said, if you're going to make something, a handmade product, it has to be perfect. And she
Hmm.
said, I'm not talking less than perfect, almost perfect. I'm talking perfect.
Hmm.
And so I I adopted that standard, and I would make a lot of things again if they weren't perfect. And so you know, I felt that uh, that standard sort of set the tone for, you know, what would follow in both my artwork and my business management.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you feel,
Your question.
do you, I guess I'm thinking of it from a sales perspective. So are you saying that, you know, when you make it perfectly, there's more value there? Is that your point with the disposable income question?
um, yes, I think if somebody is gonna make uh, an I want uh, decision as opposed to I need decision,
Yeah.
the very first the very first thing I can give them is my absolute best.
Mm-hmm.
And then I, you know, I can go into other conversations about, you know, what they're going to use it for. Is there like, are they a journaler for my line of work, or are they, you know, what are you kind of what are you going to use it for? But what I'm really getting at is, why are you interested in this?
Yeah. So learning from their motivation point.
Right.
Yeah. And
Right.
that's a great beginning sales thing. Like, what do they want? What are they interested in? And
Right.
why?
And why? Because a lot of these sales are emotional sales. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting for me because I don't buy, I mean, I will make the occasional impulse sale, but I myself like to buy something that's well made and aesthetically pleasing and will last me many years. I don't like to go to the mall every weekend and, buy something new. So, and the kind of thing I sell, I think, generally goes to that kind of shopper.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they're looking for something for a family member, so I can I can help them. And also my customers are intimately involved in the design process. So I think that builds a layer of um, uh, authenticity, and it shows that they can recommend what we should do, and then I can do it. So I'm showing them that I have a skill that not everybody has,
Right.
so that increases their perceived value. Like, yes, I'm buying something of value, um, and it may not be it's paying the light bill, but it's important to me. Maybe not as important as keeping the lights on, but nonetheless it's important, and I do want to buy it.
Mm-hmm. Great. So have you, and you mentioned earlier trial and error, and I was wondering, what have you tried in your business that didn't work initially and that you had to adapt or make more effective, especially in the areas of business, marketing, or money?
um that was an interesting question. I was looking for my answer. Ask me again, because I did answer
So
this
what
one.
have you tried that didn't work or that you had to adapt to make more effective? Basically an example of trial and error.
Well, that's funny, because I read that question and I thought, that's literally everything I do, whether it's in creative design or in business management, and it's all trial and error. I mean, that's what creativity is.
Yeah.
So I kind of came at that question from the opposite point of view. I expect to fail a couple of times. And if I can, and I also have a fair amount of stick-to-itiveness, so I will really try to figure it out. And if I can't figure it out, if I keep failing, or I'm not getting to exactly what I want, I will very quickly go get help, whether I have to pay for it or there's somebody in an organization that can just help me with it. But so I don't, I just presume trial and error is what I do. And I mean, I have so many jobs that come in that I've basically, I've never done. I just did a whole line for a photographer that I'd never done this before. I mean, it's an aspect of what I do. And she's bringing some stuff back today that popped apart. And I don't like my trial and error to get all the way to the client, but she understood. I mean, I wrote her a note yesterday and said, I just feel really bad about this. She had another bindery, and I said, I'll refund you, this whole line, and whatever you want to do. And she wrote me back and said, I'm really afraid you're gonna not want to work with me, because it's difficult to get these materials that I want to use to work together. So I hope you'll continue. So that was an interesting interaction. And
Mhm.
I didn't want to quit. I just felt bad that, if this would have been with our typical, the silks and linens that I buy all the time that are bonded book cloth that work every time, I would have had this order done in 3 days. It took me 3 weeks. And
Wow.
we ordered material from Lithuania, and I've ordered all this stuff, and we will get it. But So yeah, I mean, the benefit of that too is I'm learning, or I'm honing skills that I learned a new album design that I know is going to be really popular with photographers. So I generally find that the things my clients bring in that I've never done before end up being very valuable to me. It expands uh, my ability. It often expands my product line, or at least, you know, my product possibilities. I may not do a production run of it, but I can say, yeah, or here I have another way we can do this. So trial and error to me is every single day.
That's great. I think that's probably very true for many of us. Great. Thank you for that answer. It's awesome. Okay. So, when we talked before actually as well, you mentioned that sometimes new artists don't have a sense of what's reasonable and realistic as far as expectations go at the beginning of a business, and what it takes to run it and the timeline for making a profit. So I just want to go back to the beginning for you and talk about how, how that, if you felt like that yourself, and how that affected you, and what your perception is now about what's reasonable or what it takes to get started and get going.
Yes, it affects everybody who starts a business, and it affected me. And I was able to use my home. I was able to use an equity line on my home to borrow money, to purchase equipment, to, you know, pay myself when I needed to. And my own thought is, you know, I have watched a lot of other businesses. I think if you really know what you're doing and you get assistance, you can have, you know, 3 to 5 years, you can have a profitable business. But that is somebody who seriously understands that this is their income. They'll work harder than they'll work at a regular job, and that there has to be investment funds. It either comes from you in either savings, or, you know, if you own a home, it comes from you, or it comes from the bank, or it comes from a relative, but it has to be there. And if you start a business with no planning for cash flow, you're not going to stay in business, because you cannot build a business that quickly. You know, especially if you're, you know, you're looking for collectors, or I'm especially looking at artists where, you know, you've got to get exposure. People have to learn that you exist, what your name is, where you work, what kind of work you do they like it. So all those things of establishing, you know, those things we talked about before, your whole business structure, that can't happen without money.
Yeah. And the growth with planning, you know, I think there's stats about how 95% of businesses fail in the first 5 years, and the majority of the main reason why is cash flow. So I think that's something that's under talked about, and very, very, very important. And to have reasonable expectations of what cash flow looks like and how fast a business grows is huge. And so I love that, you know, you brought that up previously.
Well,
And
I actually think you need a really serious financial plan, and that you are monthly seeing how far you're diverging from your plan, because otherwise, you know, you could just go out of business without even
yeah,
knowing it's coming, and disappoint a lot of people, and yourself included. And and not even start until you're, you know, you have the resources to start. I think a lot of people, maybe artists, but I'm sure a restaurant or many other businesses, they just think, oh, this is a great idea, here I go. That, like you just said, you have about a 5% chance.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Great. So have you had any inner conflict about money, making money, receiving it, charging what you feel like the value of your work is?
Yes, I did quite a bit at the beginning, because I didn't have enough confidence yet in my own work. And and as time went on and I built my skills, I began to be much more confident about, what my work was worth. And I also was always checking with other people who do the same thing I do. I mean, sometimes I just go online and, inquire about the price of a box that I was making. And so, I found out what the competitive price was for what I'm doing, which, mine, and it changes geographically. Like the
Right.
stuff I do, the same thing in New York would be 2 or 2.5 times as much as my retail price.
Wow.
And that was great news for me, because I thought, yeah, I can make it at this price. So I started looking around photographers in New York who were like, yeah, I mean, I'm half the price and I will make you just as good a. And I have one client here who says that they did not get boxes as nice as mine made in New York, and they were
Mhm.
twice as expensive. So I think by doing those kind of things, you can kind of find markets that you wouldn't, that where you can charge double what you can charge here.
So it sounds like you built confidence through research and just gaining confidence over doing the work over time and people receiving the value, and that's how
Right.
you build confidence, because that's
And
really what it takes, I think, is part
building
of it.
skill. Yeah. Like there were many years when I just wasn't sure. Uh, I wasn't. They don't teach you what to charge. Um, people are. I often see that people are really conflicted about what to charge, and will very quickly reduce their price if somebody um, you know appears to be uncomfortable with the price. But I think that it's that if that's a problem that an individual's having, I would I would really try to find some mentoring around that, because that's deadly, because it's communicated to the, subliminally communicated to the buyer almost immediately.
Yeah, and that's the thing that perpetuates the artist community. That's there. And so how do we overcome that collectively? And that means owning your value and holding it and talking about the value of what you're doing and what makes it valuable.
Yeah, and I would even go back to what it really means is being your best. And if
Mm-hmm.
you look around and you're not the best, you're not even close to the best, then you want to find out that you guys have two different markets. And one person's making more of a commercial product and one person's making more of a fine art product, and those are absolutely two different markets. That none of them, I'm not making any value judgments. One's good, one's bad. They're both good. It's just that the way you're going to market those two streams is very different.
So being clear with where you are in the marketplace based on how you stand out, how you're unique, and where you're not as well.
Yeah, and who your demographic is. Like
Yeah.
if you're going for if your product is only going to be in the homes of, 10% of the population, you have a much different task in reaching that customer than if you're making something that, you know, 7 out of 10 people that come in your shop can afford to buy on the spot, then or go on your website. So um, I think that understanding your price point, understanding the demographics of your buyer will speed up your business growth a lot.
Great. So give us an example. Tell us who your demographic is.
My demographic is young. My demographic is families of a lot of different ages, but My two primary demographics are young couples, and this is on the personal side, because I break my company down into products for like personal use and products for corporate use.
Okay.
So on the personal side, I make something for every important life event, but the times that people either have time or money to invest is marriage. So I get a lot of young couples, and then they're starting to follow through with children and things like that, products with that. And then on the other end, I get a lot of retired people. One of my most interesting clientele is retired men who are writing. You know, it's the first time they've had any time themselves. The kids are gone, they're retired, and they're writing manuscripts. And you know, typical kind of I want the best kind of guy thing. They like, you know, I want good leather, I want it gold tooled, I want, you know, soup to nuts, and really want a nice piece. And then I have a lot of women of that age who want, who are writing memoirs or genealogies, or are giving gifts for significant occasions to their children and grandchildren, or things they want to leave for their family. So I've got a lot in that category. And then on my business side, I get companies who want things made, notepads or books or 3-ring binders, or with custom, you know, really nice ones with, and I get their logo made and stamp it on. And I do a lot of work for photographers, either making boxes for their prints or making albums, or oftentimes they'll have an important presentation and they might get a limited edition of 10 books of a report, and then 10 boxes, and pass them out, especially if they're, you know, applying for some kind of partnership or something. And there's other people competing and they want to make, you know, a really nice presentation, then they'll contact somebody like me.
Great. Thank you. So what has been your, as a business owner, what has been your biggest personal money lesson, or a perspective about money that you had to unlearn to move forward?
For my business, and I don't really, I don't really see I see my business finances and my personal finances differently.
I'm not sure I would keep personal in that question, actually. I guess I just want to say money lesson.
So business finances,
yeah,
keeping costs low, no impulse, no discretionary purchases. If you don't need it, don't buy it. If you're not going to use it, don't buy it. If you only need 1 yard, don't buy 5, unless there's keep your costs low, because as low as possible. I mean, you know, you have to buy quality materials if you want to make a quality product, but don't carry a lot of inventory that you don't have to. I think it's the more you look at your numbers, the more it becomes clear, you know, I want to raise the income and I want to decrease the cost.
So it sounds like you're talking specifically to cost of goods sold, some materials.
Yeah, but it could include meals and entertainment. It could include continued education. I mean, you go through the whole list of expenses in your business. You know, I think long and hard before I decide to do something that's going to be charged to my business, because it all adds up, and that's what a corporation. I mean, you know, I was part of this project where some people came in and they look at the efficiency of your setup, and we did these spaghetti diagrams, how many times you're moving things that you could maybe only move once, that kind of thing. But you know, they kind of drilled into me. And it's also been looking at my numbers year after year and saying, did I really need that? No. And now I'm like, I want my profits higher. And so I'm just much more cognizant. Before, I used to buy things like, I need it, but I didn't really need it. I will use it, let's put it that way, but I didn't really need it. And so I've become very cost conscious in my business because, if you've got your prices where they're supposed to be, you're not going to continue to raise your prices every year. So the only thing you can really do is keep a good eye on your costs.
Great, thank you. So what is the biggest challenge you have faced as an artist, and how do you deal with it?
The biggest challenge, I think, for me was my art is considered a craft, and emotionally, I was not prepared to be consistently told that I was second rate because I wasn't a fine artist. And so I did a lot of research on it, and I found out that one of the reasons craft is held to a lower standard is because crafts were identified. The separation was utility, and they were associated with domestic production. And it's almost I feel there is a sexist part of that equation where what women made in the home was not considered valuable in the market. And so as I began to understand, and the things that were defined as fine art were architecture, sculpture, and painting. And they were traditionally done by men. And so it took a while for me. I did feel inferior, and then as my skill level increased, and I began to see that the artists, at least in my part of the craft and art world, yes, they had concepts they were trying to get across, and they were meaningful, but their ability to produce a piece that was really beautiful and functional and unique was very limited. And so at some point I crossed over in my own mind and said, I think for me, this ended up being, I see myself as an artist and a craftsperson, and I'm proud of that.
Great.
That was a battle internally for me.
Mm-hmm. And you've been really involved in different fine arts and fine crafts communities for a while. So you've been in those communities and around all kinds of people making all kinds of things. Just for more context for people, because I appreciate how much of that perspective you bring through the community as well. Have you ever had somebody say something to you that you feel like they wouldn't say to anybody but an artist or craft person?
Well, I'm kind of fortunate in that I'm not one of my craft is kind of arcane and unique. So I don't have people coming in and saying, oh, I could do that. In fact, I have the opposite. Oh, I could never do that. Or how do you possibly do that? Which, it's the same thing as building a house. It's like, I wouldn't talk to a builder and say, well, I could do that. Of course I can. And that's often said, but I haven't had that, something that's tangential and really not that important. But one thing that kind of surprised me was that so many organizations asks artists to donate work. And I, having come from a background where, I was in a business organization and absolutely no one came to us and asked us to donate. Maybe on a higher level there were large donations, but not individuals who were, just trying to get by. And eventually and I did it. I gave a lot for a while. And then I figured out, you know what? This is a charitable donation. And I personally have dedicated myself to 2 or 3 organizations that I donate to. And it was at that point that I decided to say to people, I understand and I appreciate your interest in your organization, but I've already decided where
Yeah.
I donate personally, and so I would rather not. And that stopped it.
Mm-hmm.
And it stopped. It didn't. It was an honest way for me to evaluate what I was doing, that I didn't feel guilty about it.
Yeah. Great. What are you excited about in your business moving forward?
Oh my God, I'm working with this binder that's had a production bindery for 45 years. There's nothing he hasn't done.
Wow.
Driving 2 hours a week to spend 3 hours with him. And I'm just super over the top excited.
That's great. I can't wait to see that work.
So
All right.
that's like coming back to where, and at the same time, I'm signed up today for a fairly costly Instagram class, because I think that where Facebook has not been a valuable medium for me, this client I just talked about that we're still working through the products, that she saw my work on Instagram, and I realized Instagram is valuable. So there you go. I'm going to shell out a pile of dough, so I really know what I'm doing, and I have a strategy. I'm not just posting pictures.
That's great. That sounds great.
So, I mean, I think that in one sense, what I started to say was, I'm now at the point where I've got my business structure in place. I balance my books every month. And I am now able to go back to working on my craft again.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel like I had that luxury. I mean, I'd spent 10 years doing that, and then I had to spend another 5 hard years learning how to make my business, making my business work and grow. And so now I feel like there's still parts of my business I'm tweaking, but I can go back more to increasing my skill level in my craft.
Great. All right. 2 final questions. One is, if you had one piece of advice for a new artist, what would you tell them?
Do your best and recognize you have to run a real business, not a hobby, a business.
Right. Just really clarifying that distinction and learning what it takes. Great. And then what about somebody who's been in business for a while, but they want to go to the next level? What would be the most important thing you'd say to them?
Get professional help
Yeah.
with the next, with a business plan, a growth business plan, and have your goals, how much it's going to cost to get there, who's going to be your increased
Market.
market, have it all on paper before you do anything.
Great. Beautiful advice. Thank you, Mary Carol. This has been so great.
Okay.
I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jen.